He ruled Seoul's underworld with a single word. Whispered conversations ended empires. Men bowed before he entered rooms. For 15 years, Jin-Ho had never made a mistake, not one. Until the day he hired her. Her name was Amara, and she wasn't supposed to matter. She was just an assistant, just a black woman from Lagos who needed work and took the first job she could get. But what happened next would shake the entire Yakuza structure of South Korea and change Jin-Ho forever. This is the story of a man who lost control, and the woman who made him lose it. Let me paint you a picture of who Jin-Ho was before Amara walked into his life. Born into the Kim family syndicate, Jin-Ho was groomed from childhood. His father ran the largest organized crime operation in East Asia. But Jin-Ho? He was different, smarter, colder. By age 25, he'd eliminated 3 rival gangs without firing a single shot. He negotiated their surrenders. By 30, he owned half of Seoul. Not just the city's nightlife, the ports, the shipping routes, the financial institutions that laundered billions. Jin-Ho didn't just participate in crime. He engineered it like a chess master who'd studied every opening for decades. His penthouse sat on the 42nd floor of the Hansung Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River. From his desk, he could see 7 different neighborhoods where his operations ran. His net worth was in the billions, untouchable, unreachable. The men who worked for him, they feared him more than they feared God. And Jin-Ho preferred it that way. There was a story that circulated among Seoul's underworld, a story that defined exactly who Jin-Ho was. 5 years before Amara arrived, a low-ranking gang member named Da Jung made a mistake. He skimmed $500,000 from a drug shipment. A small mistake in an empire worth billions, but a mistake nonetheless. When Jin-Ho found out, he didn't order an execution. That would have been too easy, too expected. Instead, he called Da Jung to his office. Da Jung entered the penthouse expecting to die. His hands were shaking. His body was already preparing for the end. But Jin-Ho, he just smiled. That cold, calculated smile that made men's blood run cold. Da Jung, Jin-Ho said, his voice soft as silk. You stole from me. Yes, boss. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Da Jung pleaded. Do you know what I could do to you right now? Jin-Ho stood up and walked to the window. I could end you, make it look like you never existed. Your family would never find your body. Da Jung fell to his knees. But I won't, Jin-Ho continued. Instead, I'm going to let you live. Live with what you did. Live knowing that every person in this organization knows what you stole. Live knowing that your reputation is ruined, that you're worthless, and that I own you now, forever. Da Jung was released that day. 3 months later, he took his own life, unable to bear the weight of his humiliation. That was Jin-Ho's power, not violence, psychological devastation. He didn't need to kill people. He just needed to make them wish they were dead. This was the man who would meet Amara. But even empires have cracks. By the time Amara arrived at Jin-Ho's office in September 2023, something had shifted in Seoul's underworld. A new crime family was rising, the Park Syndicate, led by a man named Min-sok who was hungry, ruthless, and patient. Min-sok was 32 years old. He'd grown up watching Jin-Ho dominate the city, and now he was making his move, slowly, methodically, poisoning Jin-Ho's relationships with key allies, offering better deals, taking territory inch by inch. Jin-Ho's advisors were nervous. For the first time in 15 years, their boss looked stressed, tired. His legendary coldness was cracking. He needed someone he could trust completely. Someone who understood his world but wasn't contaminated by it. Someone who could work in the shadows without asking questions. That's when Min Jun, his closest advisor, suggested hiring a personal assistant. A foreigner. Someone with no connections to Seoul's underworld. Someone disposable if things went wrong. Find someone intelligent, Jin-Ho commanded. Someone who can keep their mouth shut. Someone invisible. Min Jun nodded. He'd know exactly who to find. It was just supposed to be a temporary solution, a way to buy time while Jin-Ho figured out his next move against Min-sok. He had no idea he was about to hire the woman who would unravel everything. Amara stepped out of the elevator at 8:47 a.m. on a Monday morning. She was 29 years old, educated at the University of Lagos with a degree in business administration. She'd come to Seoul 3 years ago on a student visa, desperate to build a life away from her family's expectations. Her parents wanted her to marry a wealthy Nigerian businessman. Amara wanted to build something of her own. When the job posting came through a recruiter, Amara almost didn't apply. Personal assistant to a CEO. The salary was triple what she was making. The hours were listed as flexible. The company name was K Industries, which told her nothing. She went for the interview wearing a navy suit she'd bought at a second-hand shop. Her hair was pulled back in a professional bun. She looked every bit the competent professional, even though her hands were trembling as she rode the elevator up. But when she walked into the office on the 42nd floor, she froze. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the Seoul skyline, was the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. Tall, immaculate suit, cold eyes that seemed to look through her. But there was something else, something beneath the perfection, a weight, a darkness, like he was carrying something so heavy that it had carved lines into his face. "You're the new assistant," Jin-Ho said. Not a question. "Yes," Amara replied, forcing confidence into her voice. "Amara, I have 3 years of administrative experience and—" Jin-Ho raised his hand, cutting her off. "I don't care about your experience," he said coldly. "Minjun says you're smart, discreet, that you keep to yourself. That true?" "Yes," Amara said. "Good. You start tomorrow. Your job is simple. You organize my schedule. You manage my correspondence. You attend all my meetings and take notes. You never speak about anything you see or hear. If you do, you die. Is that clear?" Amara's stomach dropped. "Yes," she whispered. "Excellent. You're hired." And that was it. She was now the personal assistant to one of Seoul's most dangerous men. She had no idea what she'd gotten herself into. All she knew was that when he'd said those words, his eyes had lingered on her for just a moment longer than necessary. She told herself she'd imagined it. The first month was brutal. Jin-Ho worked 18-hour days. Amara was at his side for all of it. Meetings in underground casinos, negotiations in abandoned warehouses, late-night calls with people whose voices made her skin crawl. She watched him conduct business with such precision, such control, that she began to understand exactly how dangerous he truly was. He was methodical. He never raised his voice. He never made threats. He simply presented facts and consequences, and men bent to his will. But what surprised her most was how he treated her. With absolute indifference. He never asked her personal questions, never made eye contact unless necessary, treated her like she was invisible, and Amara told herself that was exactly what she wanted. She was here for the money. She was here to build her savings and eventually return to Lagos with something to show for her sacrifice. Except, there was one moment. It happened on her 28th day working for him. They were in his penthouse, reviewing documents late at night. The city lights of Seoul spread out below them like fallen stars. It was past 2 a.m. The building was empty except for them. Amara had made a mistake in her notes, a small one, a date written incorrectly, something that would cause confusion in a contract negotiation. When Jin-Ho noticed, she waited for the cold fury, the calculated humiliation. But instead, he just looked at her. "You're tired," he said quietly. It was the first personal observation he'd ever made about her. "Yes," Amara admitted. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "Go home," Jin-Ho said. "Sleep. Come back when you're rested." And when she left his office that night, Amara realized something that terrified her. She was starting to like him, starting to see past the darkness to something human underneath. It was the beginning of the mistake. The second month changed everything. The park syndicate's moves were becoming more aggressive. They'd poached 2 of Jin-Ho's most loyal lieutenants. They'd moved into territory Jin-Ho had owned for years. The pressure was building. And for the first time, Amara began to see cracks in Jin-Ho's legendary composure. He'd snap at his advisors over minor issues. His normally immaculate appearance became slightly disheveled. One morning, Amara found him asleep at his desk, his face etched with exhaustion. Without thinking, she grabbed a blanket from his office couch and draped it over his shoulders. When Jin-Ho woke up an hour later, he found her sitting quietly in a chair, reviewing documents so she wouldn't disturb him. His reaction was strange. He didn't scold her, didn't tell her to never do that again. Instead, he just watched her for a long moment. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "It's past 6 p.m. "You need support," Amara said simply. "I'm your assistant. That's my job." And something shifted in his eyes, something that looked almost like gratitude. "You should leave Seoul," Jin-Ho said suddenly. "This city, it's dangerous for people like you." "People like me?" Amara asked. "Good people," he said quietly. "People who still have souls. This world, it destroys souls." Amara should have listened, should have walked away right then. Instead, she asked the question that would change everything. "What if I don't want to leave?" Jin-Ho's jaw tightened. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Amara saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Real, human fear. "Then you're going to regret it," he said. But he didn't send her away. That was the mistake. That moment, right there. Not anything he did, but everything he didn't do. He didn't fire her, didn't push her away, didn't build the walls back up. He let her stay. And that single decision would set everything that followed into motion. By month 3, Amara was no longer just an assistant. She'd become something else. A confidant, a constant presence, and most dangerous of all, a witness. She was in the room when the Park Syndicate made their final move, a massive territory grab that would have crippled Jin-Ho's operations. But Jin-Ho didn't panic. Instead, he executed a counterattack so brilliant that Amara found herself watching in awe as he turned the tables completely. He offered a key Park ally a better deal. When the man refused, Jin-Ho had leveraged information about the man's secret family, a wife the Alliance didn't know about, children in a city Jin-Ho also controlled. The man defected immediately, and with him came insider knowledge of Minsok's entire operation. Watching Jin-Ho work was like watching a conductor orchestrate a symphony. Every note perfectly placed, every movement calculated. And the most terrifying part? The man never showed a shred of emotion while he destroyed people's lives. That night, after the deal was sealed, Jin-Ho was standing at his window, the usual place, the place where Amara had learned he retreated when he needed to think. "You're still here," he said without turning around. "You didn't tell me to leave," Amara replied. "I should have. Why didn't you?" There was a long silence, long enough that Amara thought he wouldn't answer. But then, "Because I'm tired," he said finally. "Tired of being alone. Tired of only seeing darkness. And when you're around, the darkness feels a little less heavy." Amara's breath caught. "That's a dangerous thing to say to me," she whispered. "I know," Jin-Ho said, and he finally turned to face her. "That's why I'm saying it. Because I'm done being careful. Done following the rules I set for myself. I'm done with this life destroying everything good inside me." "Jin-Ho," she started. "I know I'm not a good man," he continued. "I know what I've done, who I am. But when I look at you, I feel like maybe I could be someone different, someone less broken." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to anyone. And Amara made the choice that would seal both their fates. She crossed the room, and she kissed him. That kiss changed everything. It wasn't a Hollywood kiss. It was desperate, raw. The kiss of a man who was drowning and had found something to hold on to. The kiss of a woman who'd been fighting her feelings and finally surrendered. When they pulled apart, Jin-Ho pressed his forehead against hers. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "I know," Amara replied. "If anyone finds out about this, it puts you in danger. Real danger. Not just from me, from my enemies, from my own organization. They'll see you as leverage." "I understand." "No, you don't," he said harshly. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." But even as he said it, he didn't let her go. His hands stayed on her waist. His eyes stayed locked on hers. For the next 3 weeks, they kept it secret. Hidden moments in his penthouse after everyone had left. Conversations that nobody else was allowed to hear. A world that existed only for them, small and fragile and doomed. Amara fell asleep against his chest and dreamed of futures that could never happen. Jin-Ho held her while she slept, and for the first time in his adult life, felt something besides ambition and hunger. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and in the underworld, secrets are currency. Min-jun was the first to notice. He found them one evening, Jin-Ho's hand on the small of Amara's back as they stood on the penthouse balcony. It was a small gesture, barely a touch, but in their world, it meant everything. Min-jun said nothing, but Jin-Ho could see it in his eyes. The realization, the calculation of what this meant. 3 days later, the rumors started. Jin-Ho was emotionally compromised. Jin-Ho had fallen for his assistant. Jin-Ho was making decisions based on feelings rather than logic. The rumors spread through the organization like poison, and with them came the danger. One morning, Amara arrived to find her apartment ransacked. Someone was sending a message. A warning. "We know who you are. We know where you live. You're a target." When she told Jin-Ho, she expected him to end it. Send her away. Protect himself by cutting her loose. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He brought her into the penthouse, moved her into his private quarters, surrounded her with his security. To the entire organization, it became official. Amara was his woman, his priority, his weakness. His advisors were furious. "This is insane," Min-jun shouted during a meeting. "You're risking everything for a woman you barely know." "I'm done listening to what you think," Jin-Ho replied coldly. "She stays. That's final." But Amara heard the conversation through the door, and she understood the enormity of what he'd just done. Jin-Ho had put her above his empire, above his legacy, above everything he'd built for 15 years. It should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like the beginning of the end. Because in Seoul's underworld, choices like that get punished. And Jin-Ho's enemies had been waiting for exactly this moment. The moment when he let something matter more than his ruthlessness. The moment when he became vulnerable. That night, Amara had a conversation with Min-Ho that changed the trajectory of everything. "I need to leave," she said. "Never," Jin-Ho replied. "You don't understand. I'm destroying you. Look at what's happening to your organization. Look at the fear in your men's eyes." "I don't care," he said. "Well, I do." Amara's voice broke. "I can't be the reason your entire empire falls apart. I can't be responsible for that." "Then don't be," Jin-Ho said simply. "Don't leave. Stay. Build something different with me. A life that isn't about power or control. Just us." "That's not possible," Amara whispered. "Not in this world." But even as she said it, she held on to him. Because the truth was, she didn't want to leave. She was as trapped as he was. And they both knew it. Min-sok made his move exactly 3 weeks later. He didn't attack Jin-Ho directly. He was smarter than that. Instead, he abducted Amara. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. She was leaving a cafe, a small moment of freedom that Jin-Ho had allowed her. Security was supposed to be watching, but Min-sok's men were better, more patient. They grabbed her off the street, threw her into a van, and by the time Jin-Ho's security realized she was missing, she was already in an abandoned warehouse across the city. When Jin-Ho found out, something inside him broke. For the first time in his adult life, he experienced pure, unfiltered fear. Not fear for himself, fear for her. It was a feeling so alien, so overwhelming, that it nearly paralyzed him. Min-sok sent a video message. It showed Amara, hands bound, eyes defiant but terrified, and Min-sok's voice, smooth and confident. "Hello, Jin-Ho. I have something you want. I propose a trade. Her life for your empire. You step down as head of the organization. All your assets transfer to me. In exchange, she walks free. You have 24 hours to decide." The choice was impossible. Give up everything he'd built. Everything he'd sacrificed for, every person he'd hurt, and every moral line he'd crossed to accumulate. Or lose Amara. For the first time in 15 years, Jin-Ho didn't have a master plan. He didn't have a brilliant move that would outmaneuver his enemy. He was simply a man in love, facing the end of his world. His advisors were united. "Don't give in," they said. "She's not worth the empire." But Jin-Ho just looked at them. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "She's worth everything." And he gave the order. "Prepare the transfer documents." He was stepping down. Everything he'd built was about to belong to Min-sok. It was over. The empire was collapsing. All because of one moment. One decision to let someone matter more than his ambition. The mistake had come due. But here's what Min-sok didn't know. In their 3 months together, Amara had learned more about Jin-Ho's organization than she realized. She'd memorized names, locations, weaknesses, and while she was bound in that warehouse, she was calculating. She watched the guards, noted their patterns, identified the weapons within reach, and most importantly, she understood something fundamental about power in Seoul's underworld. Loyalty is everything. The men guarding her, they weren't Min-soks, they were mercenaries, and mercenaries can be bought. When Jin-Ho's second wave of security arrived, they didn't come with weapons. They came with something more valuable, briefcases filled with cash, enough money to buy the loyalty of 36 hired guns. By the time Min-sok realized what was happening, his operation was falling apart from within. But Jin-Ho wasn't interested in quick victories anymore. He arranged a meeting with Min-sok, one-on-one, in a neutral location, the kind of meeting that usually ends with a body in the Han River. But Jin-Ho had changed. Instead of killing Min-sok, he offered him something. A deal. A way out. "Leave Seoul," Jin-Ho said simply. "Go to Busan. Start a new operation there. Stay out of my territory. In return, you stay alive." Min-sok, beaten and humiliated, accepted. It was the first mercy Jin-Ho had ever shown an enemy, and it changed everything about how the underworld saw him. Not as a ruthless tyrant anymore, but as something more dangerous. A man who could be merciful. A man who had found something worth being merciful for. Amara was freed that night. She and Jin-Ho were reunited in his penthouse, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have a future. But the mistake wasn't over. It had just transformed. Because when Jin-Ho made the decision to prioritize Amara over his empire, something fundamental shifted in Seoul's underworld. It wasn't a violent shift. No one died. No territory changed hands. But the narrative did. Word spread. Jin-Ho is done. He's soft. He's in love. He's vulnerable. Men he'd controlled for years started moving, testing his boundaries, making moves they would never have dared before. And Jin-Ho found himself fighting not just external enemies, but the decay of his own organization. His power was still immense, but it was no longer absolute. The mistake he'd made in choosing love over empire had a cost, and that cost was his legacy. The thing he'd spent 15 years building was slowly crumbling. Amara watched it happen and understood the price she'd extracted from him. One night, as they lay in bed, she asked him if he regretted it. "Do you regret choosing me over your empire?" she whispered. Jin-Ho was silent for a long moment. "Every day," he said finally. Amara's heart broke. "But I would do it again," he continued. 1,000 times, I would do it again. Because the empire was always going to fall. Empires always do. But what we have, this is the only thing that's ever felt real. And Amara understood then that this was love in the underworld. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a tragedy. A choice between two impossible things. A man giving up his kingdom for a woman. And a woman carrying the weight of that sacrifice for the rest of her life. The Korean Mafia boss had made one mistake. He'd fallen in love. And in doing so, he'd lost his empire. But maybe, Amara thought, he'd gained something worth more. Maybe. So what happened to them? Jin-Ho is still alive, still in Seoul, but he's no longer the most powerful man in the city. Others have risen. Others have taken his territory. He's wealthy beyond measure, but his empire is fractured. Amara never left. They got married in a quiet ceremony that only Min-jun attended. They have a daughter now, a beautiful girl with her mother's eyes and her father's sharp intelligence. And Jin-Ho? He's learning what it means to be someone's father, someone's husband, someone who builds instead of destroys. Is he happy? That's the real question, isn't it? Some nights, when the city lights reflect off the Han River below their apartment, Jin-Ho stands at the window and thinks about the man he used to be, the unstoppable force, the king of Seoul's underworld, and he feels the weight of everything he gave up. But then Amara comes and wraps her arms around him, and their daughter runs in, laughing, asking him to play. And Jin-Ho realizes something. The mistake he made wasn't falling in love. The mistake was thinking that power and empire and control were ever the point. The mistake was the 15 years he spent chasing dominance instead of connection. The mistake was believing that a man could build something meaningful by destroying everything around him. The real tragedy isn't that he lost his empire. The real tragedy is that it took losing everything to find what he was actually looking for. A woman who saw the darkness in him and loved him anyway. A life that mattered for reasons beyond power. A world where the strongest thing he could do was admit he was weak, admit he needed someone, admit he was afraid. That's the story of the Korean Mafia boss who made one mistake. And if you think about it, maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe it was the first right choice he'd ever made.